The marble floors of the courthouse were supposed to reflect justice. Instead, they reflected humiliation. A black woman in a navy blue suit lay stretched across the cold tiles, her briefcase thrown aside, her body being dragged by two uniformed deputies who never once asked her name. Their grip tightened around her arms and legs as murmurs rippled through the hallway. Cameras lifted, phones recorded, and somewhere behind the chaos, someone laughed and muttered words that would echo far beyond those walls. They called her trash. They said she didn't belong there. What they didn't know was that the very woman they were dragging toward the courthouse steps was the one scheduled to preside over the biggest case in that building that morning. And within minutes, everything would change. Before we continue, take a moment to share, comment, and subscribe to Black Legacy for more powerful stories that expose injustice and celebrate truth. Judge Amara Ellison had built her life brick by brick in a country that constantly tried to convince her she was standing on borrowed land. Born in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta, she grew up surrounded by contradictions. Her mother, a public school teacher, taught her that the law was meant to protect everyone. Her father, a sanitation worker who left the house before sunrise, taught her that the law did not always live up to that promise. From an early age, Amara understood what it meant to navigate spaces where she was underestimated before she even spoke. She excelled academically, not because it came easily, but because she understood something critical. Excellence was armor. By the time she graduated from law school at the top of her class, she had already interned with civil rights attorneys, clerked for a federal judge, and written papers analyzing systemic disparities in sentencing patterns. Her career was not accidental. It was intentional. Her appointment to the bench at 42 made history in her district. She was the first black woman to serve as a presiding judge in that courthouse's century-long existence. Her swearing-in ceremony had been quiet but significant. Her mother had cried softly in the front row. Her father had stood straighter than ever before. But history does not protect you from prejudice. The courthouse itself was a towering symbol of tradition, white columns stretching upward, marble steps polished daily, and portraits of former judges lining the corridors. Every portrait told the same story. Older white men, stern expressions, robes flowing like authority made visible. Amara's portrait had not yet been added. That morning, she chose to arrive early. A high-profile corporate fraud case was scheduled, drawing media attention and a crowded docket. She preferred walking through the courthouse before it filled with noise. It gave her time to center herself. She wore a tailored navy suit over a crisp white blouse, her hair styled in long, neat braids that framed her face. She carried her leather briefcase in one hand and a folder of case notes in the other. As she approached the entrance, she noticed increased security presence. 2 deputies stood near the metal detectors, their posture rigid. Several lawyers gathered near the columns, murmuring among themselves. She stepped inside. The first deputy's gaze lingered too long. The second deputy exchanged a glance with him. It was subtle, but she felt it. She had felt it many times before. The silent question of legitimacy. She placed her briefcase on the security belt. The deputy asked for identification. She reached into her purse. Before she could fully retrieve her badge, the hallway erupted in noise. Someone nearby raised their voice about access restrictions. Another person stepped forward. The deputies misinterpreted movement as resistance. Their hands grabbed her wrists. The badge slipped from her fingers and skidded across the marble floor. In that split second, perception hardened into assumption. To them, she was not a judge. She was an intruder, a disturbance, an inconvenience. And when one deputy muttered, "Drag this trash out," the words weren't just about the moment. They were about something much older. The crowd gathered quickly. Lawyers, interns, staff members, all watching. Some recognized her face, but froze in disbelief. Others simply recorded. Amara did not scream. She did not beg. She did not thrash. But as her body slid across the polished floor, something deeper than humiliation burned in her chest. It was a realization that no title could fully shield her from the assumptions attached to her skin. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed under the morning sun. Inside, history was about to collide with reality. The deputies tightened their grip as they maneuvered her toward the entrance. Her heel caught briefly against the floor, scraping against the marble before slipping free. The hallway echoed with the scuffling of shoes and the mechanical hum of security scanners, continuing their routine indifference. Amara's mind raced, not with fear, but with clarity. She had studied countless cases involving unlawful detainment. She had read transcripts where individuals described the moment authorities stripped them of dignity. Now she understood, viscerally, the cold shock of that power imbalance. The badge remained on the floor, behind them. A junior clerk named Nathan Reed stood frozen near the clerk's desk. He recognized her instantly. He had assisted her chambers during orientation week. But disbelief paralyzed him. How could trained deputies make such a mistake? Outside, reporters began capturing footage. They had come for the corporate fraud case, but found something else far more explosive. The words "big mistake" floated to the murmuring crowd when someone finally bent down and picked up the badge. The deputy nearest the door glanced back just long enough to see the gold seal glinting in the fluorescent light. Confusion flickered across his face. He slowed. Nathan pushed forward, holding the badge high. His voice trembled as he shouted her name. The hallway shifted. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes widened. The second deputy released her leg abruptly, stepping back as if burned. The first deputy hesitated, still gripping her arm, his mind recalibrating too slowly. It took 3 seconds for realization to fully land, 3 seconds for authority to recognize authority. They released her. Amara adjusted her jacket slowly as she rose to her feet. The hallway fell into a silence, so complete it felt engineered. Her expression was not furious. It was measured, and that composure unsettled them more than outrage ever could. The chief court administrator emerged from an adjacent corridor, drawn by the noise. His face drained of color as he took in the scene. The scattered briefcase, the gathered crowd, the deputies standing rigid with dawning panic. Injustice had unfolded in plain sight. But the deeper tension had only begun, because what had happened was not a simple case of mistaken identity. It was a reflection of instinct, of who is seen as belonging in spaces of power, and who is presumed to be trespassing. Within minutes, the courthouse buzzed with whispers. Phones lit up with text messages. Local news outlets began streaming live. The deputies attempted apologies, their voices low and urgent. But the words landed hollow in the charged air. Amara bent down and retrieved her folder. She did not rush. She did not dramatize. She simply walked back inside. And every step echoed like a verdict. Courtroom for be filled beyond capacity. The corporate fraud case that had drawn media attention now shared headlines with the incident in the hallway. Reporters squeezed into back benches. Staff members stood along the walls. When the courtroom doors opened, all eyes turned. Judge Amara Ellison entered wearing her black judicial robe. The deputies who had dragged her stood at the side of the room, faces pale beneath their uniforms. Their earlier certainty had dissolved into visible dread. She took her seat behind the bench. The power dynamic reversed in a single, undeniable shift. But this was not about revenge. It was about accountability. She began the session with procedural precision. Her voice remained steady, controlled, unwavering. No mention of the hallway incident interrupted her delivery. She presided with the same fairness and sharp legal reasoning she had built her reputation upon. And that was the true turning point, because she refused to let humiliation derail her authority. However, once the corporate matter adjourned, she did something unexpected. She requested the presence of the chief administrator and the deputies in open court. The room held its breath. Without raising her voice, she addressed systemic bias, procedural failures, and the responsibility that comes with carrying a badge. She spoke not as a victim, but as a guardian of the institution itself. She emphasized that justice begins at the courthouse doors. Her words were deliberate, each one cutting deeper than anger ever could. She outlined the importance of proper identification protocols, implicit bias training, and the consequences of unchecked assumptions. The deputies stood motionless, confronted not by rage, but by truth, and in that moment, the humiliation shifted direction, not toward individuals alone, but toward a system that had allowed such reflexive prejudice to fester. The courtroom understood they were witnessing more than a correction of error. They were witnessing a reckoning. The footage spread nationwide by nightfall. Discussions erupted across legal communities, social platforms, and news panels. The image of a black judge dragged across courthouse marble floors forced conversations many preferred to avoid. Internal investigations followed swiftly. The deputies were placed on administrative leave, pending review. Mandatory bias training protocols were implemented across the district, but the deeper impact extended beyond disciplinary measures. Law students cited the incident in essays about representation in the judiciary. Advocacy groups referenced it in campaigns demanding systemic reform. Editorials questioned how many others had faced similar treatment without cameras present. For Judge Amara Ellison, the experience became a defining chapter, not a weakness, but a resilience. She continued presiding over cases with unwavering dedication. Her rulings remained fair, balanced, and rooted in the Constitution she had sworn to uphold. Months later, her portrait was added to the courthouse wall. It hung among the others, a silent testament to progress still unfinished. Visitors who passed through those halls could no longer ignore the image. It reminded them that authority does not have one face. It reminded them that prejudice can infiltrate even the most sacred institutions. And it reminded them that dignity, once reclaimed, becomes unshakable. Because that morning was never just about one woman. It was about perception, about power, about the dangerous ease with which bias can override protocol, and about the strength required to respond with integrity when injustice strikes unexpectedly. If this story moved you, take a moment to share, comment, and subscribe to Black Legacy. These stories matter. These conversations matter. And together, we ensure they are never forgotten.